Trump calling the Mueller probe an illegal investigation and giving new hints about Jeff Sessions' future in the Trump administration. Trump saying that his job is safe, at least until the midterm elections. That news amid new reporting that President Trump and his allies, or I should say his allies, are worrying about the White House. The White House is about to get caught flat-footed amid a crush of potential investigations. And as Trump struggles to get his story straight on the very latest White House official to be stepping down. That counsel, Don McGahn, first Trump tweeting his son-in-law and daughter had nothing to do with the so-called pushing out of Don McGahn, seeming to imply that McGahn wasn't really pushed out. But then this, an hour and a half later, saying the Russia witch hunt didn't come into play with his decision on Don McGahn, which seems to mean that he was fired. The White House later telling NBC Trump's decision referred to him accepting McGahn's departure, but McGahn is leaving, as Trump's advisors tell the Washington Post. The White House isn't equipped to handle the onslaught of investigations that may be coming. It's still, if Democrats win the House, without either the staff or the strategy to handle those investigations. With me now, Robert Costa, national political reporter for the Washington Post, Richard Painter, former White House ethics chief under President George W. Bush, former federal prosecutor John Flannery, and Harvard University professor Leah Wright-Rigueur. Great to have all of you with us. Two big pieces of information I want to get all of your reactions to. Robert, let me begin with you. The president calling the Mueller probe illegal. What are you hearing about that? Is this an escalation from the president?
It is an escalation of his rhetoric, but you see in his comments in the Bloomberg interview that Attorney General Jeff Sessions looks like he's safe, at least for now, with his position until the midterm elections. And while the president continues to rail against the Mueller probe, he hasn't signaled that he's ready to take action against it. This seems to be just yet another step in his credibility battle with Robert Mueller.
Leah, let me get your reaction, too, as well. Both the comments that Jeff Sessions' job is safe until the midterms, some interpreting that as somewhat of a veiled threat, better shape up or ship out, so to speak, right, if I can use that expression, but also now calling the Mueller probe illegal.
Right. So I don't even see it as a veiled threat. I see it as a very direct threat. And we know that Donald Trump has been making very explicit threats to Jeff Sessions and expressing his unhappiness with Sessions' refusal to put himself back into the Russia investigation and to be a loyalist and to be a team player. So we've seen that over and over again. We've also heard reports that behind the scenes that Trump is dissatisfied and unhappy and, in fact, has been mocking Jeff Sessions for quite some time. I think he's putting it out there that he is willing to do what he thinks what it takes to save himself and to put himself in a position that he feels like Jeff Sessions isn't doing for him.
Richard, let me get your, if I can, your thoughts on the terminology of this being illegal. Does that signal anything to you about terms of the president's approach to the Mueller probe, or perhaps, as I was just talking with Robert about it, being an escalation?
It's more of the same old nonsense. He's been calling it a witch hunt for over a year. This is obviously not a witch hunt. We've seen the president's campaign manager, deputy campaign manager, former lawyer, all found guilty of felonies, others as well. This is a very serious investigation. He's accusing Robert Mueller of being a Democrat. Everybody in Washington knew that Robert Mueller was a Republican coming into the Bush administration to head up the FBI. The only evidence they've ever found he's a Democrat, he played in the same high school hockey team as John Kerry. I guess that makes him a Democrat. I mean, this is just ridiculous. They keep attacking Bob Mueller simply for doing his job. And the president is tweeting his way into an obstruction of justice charge on top of all his other legal difficulties. But it's more of the same old, and if he fires Jeff Sessions to get rid of Robert Mueller, he's going to find himself yet with another count of obstruction of justice.
John, let me ask you about the Jeff Sessions angle to this for a moment. Obviously, this is making news today. Some senators earlier in the week as well saying that it's just a matter of time before Sessions gets fired. In doing so, is the president signaling to his next potential attorney general what he wants done? And could that possibly become a factor in the obstruction of justice investigation, the way he's talking about Sessions and what he wants Sessions to do, which is to be a loyalist, to quote Leah?
I agree absolutely, and I think it's a Rudy two-step, if you will. What they're doing is they're clearing the decks for war, but the first step is to get through the midterms, and then they're going to do whatever they want to get rid of Sessions, to replace McGahn with whomever, and go to war. And the thing about Sessions, which is interesting, is that I guess there's only one way to define it, which is to obstruct the investigation, to see if he can get rid of Rosenstein, to see if he can get rid of Mueller, and to do it after the election is over when he believes he's at his strongest. I think that this is a real threat to the country. And I think that it's interesting when you see somebody like Lindsey Graham, who has felt so strongly about this, pull back and say, oh, I guess we could get rid of Sessions. I don't know if he thinks he's going to get the job or he's going to be the new counsel. But this is a dramatic attack on law and the Constitution, and only for one reason, for the president to cover his hindquarters. There's no other reason for him to do this.
So Robert, with the president signaling now in this Bloomberg interview that he's going to at least hold on to Sessions until the midterms, is there any chance that we see any kind of reaction from Republican lawmakers who had been coming to the defense of Jeff Sessions and try and convince the president otherwise? I mean, are we going to see any kind of behind-the-scenes politics here over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks?
For now, they may be relieved on Capitol Hill because they don't want to have the distraction of the Attorney General being fired right before voters go to the polls. But you may see a behind-the-scenes campaign now between the White House and Congress, where you have lawmakers urging the president to not take any action, not only until after the midterm elections, but until after Robert Mueller issues his report on the president's conduct. So there's no question in their eyes that there's obstruction of justice going on.
And speaking really quickly politically, I mean, if the president does go ahead and fire Jeff Sessions, Robert, the next incoming attorney general is still going to have to be confirmed by the Senate. I mean, he is, from some political calculations, really making this an uphill battle for whoever his next attorney general would be, no?
Exactly right. I mean, you think about the president's intent, still under scrutiny about what he did with then FBI Director Jim Comey. If he moved on the Attorney General, you'd have that same kind of scrutiny of the president's intent this time. Is he removing Jeff Sessions? Should he do so to disrupt the Russia probe or not? And you can bet that Republicans and Democrats would have tough questions for whoever was nominated about what their intent would be should they become AG. Would they let the Mueller investigation carry on or not?
Leah, how does the decision to fire an attorney general, politically speaking, on one hand, as we just heard from Robert, have its own ramifications? Legally speaking, how can it fit into the big picture obstruction of justice argument or narrative that some have been saying the president is guilty of?
Sure. So, I mean, we're talking about a president who has marketed and sold himself as a law and order president, who actually has no respect for law and order. And this is exactly what we're seeing, which is that the rules don't matter, the norms don't matter, traditions don't matter, what is legal doesn't matter. What matters is what I want to do. And that's the way that Trump has always kind of run his businesses. It's how he's run his campaign. It's how he's run his life. And why would the presidency be anything different? So I think, too, when we're thinking about obstruction of justice, when we're thinking about, what is it that, is the president trying to get around this, et cetera, we have to keep in mind that this is a man who has never had consideration for the president, for the actual, for rule of law and order and norms.
Richard, let me get your thoughts really quickly on Don McGahn, this kind of flip-flopping, if you will, as to whether or not he was pushed out, whether he is stepping down on his own. It seems to be some mixed signals coming out of the White House, or at least I should be very clear, the president's Twitter feed today. And how do you see this playing in the fact that you had him recently interviewed by Bob Mueller for nearly 30 hours, and then the way the president tweeted about him today, saying that it was my decision for McGahn to leave?
Yeah, I think the president pushed him out, and Don McGahn talked to Robert Mueller because he had an obligation to. He's a lawyer for the president in his official capacity. He's not a personal lawyer for President Trump, and he had an obligation to talk with Bob Mueller and discuss what he saw, and he's witnessed a lot of obstruction of justice going all the way back to the beginning of this administration. So there's plenty to talk about for 30 hours there. And I'm shocked that he stayed this long. I don't know who is going to take his place, whether Emmett Flood wants that job or not, because any lawyer who gets wrapped up in helping Donald Trump fire Robert Mueller and obstruct justice is asking to themselves get hit with an obstruction of justice charge, lose their law license, end up making license plates. I don't think a good lawyer like Emmett Flood's going to want to end up in jail. So I don't know who wants to take this job if Donald Trump wants a lawyer running the White House counsel's office who's going to orchestrate the firing of Robert Mueller. It's a non-starter.
All right, let me play you guys what former Trump Organization executive Barbara Ress said today about Trump's self-control. Take a listen.
He sort of has no self-control. I mean, there was never any external control to speak of. I mean, way back he used to listen to people, but, after that, once he became very famous and full of himself, there was no external control, but he did have a little bit of self-control. Right now, it looks like he's out of control.
So, Robert, let me get first your read from some of the contacts and sources you speak to. Do you get a sense his allies think that this president is out of control?
They believe that he's isolated, that he's making his own decisions. They know that Chief of Staff John Kelly is not providing much of a guardrail around this presidency. Don McGahn is heading for the exit. You have cabinet officials who may have a rapport with the president but aren't trying to keep him away from any decisions. It's really the president, his Twitter account, a few core advisors running on gut instinct. That's the reality of this presidency. Some people in the Republican Party love it. Others are alarmed.
John, there's a window of a guideline, if you will, if you want to use that among prosecutors, that is getting narrower by the day for Bob Mueller to issue any possible indictments ahead of the midterm elections and it not appear to be political. Do you see there a perfect storm gathering between the Mueller investigation, if the Democrats take control of the House, that this president is legally not prepared for what may be coming his way?
Most of his administration has not been prepared. He's used power and muscle and come on in any way that he felt he could, and covering up one set of lies for the next set of lies. But I'm not so sure that Mueller is going to keep his powder dry at Rudy's request for the next 60 days. I just don't think that's going to happen. And I think that he's right not to let that happen because it's their strategy. But when the Democrats come in, if they do have this wave and they come in and they're in charge of the committees, I think that we're going to see an assault on the questions we've had about taxes and abuses and corruption, but also about the obstruction and this crazy conspiracy that he's had with Russia that leaves him meek like some sort of doll when he's in Helsinki. I think that we're in for some rough waters, but I like the direction. I think there's been a tectonic shift against the president, and I think that's what we're seeing here, his desperation. There was a remark today, at Senator McCain's memorial service about how character is destiny. Well, if you have no character, your destiny has to be a tragedy, and that's what we have in the White House right now.
To that point that John just brought up, Leah, about the White House facing all of these potential legal challenges, not staffed for it. Generally, the White House is generally a place that recruits pretty well as an institution. People want to work there. People want to serve the country. Do you see this administration, this White House, capable of recruiting the talent they need for a possible legal challenge?
So on the one hand, this White House is absolutely understaffed across all areas. We know that. We've heard several reports. There have been several books that have come out that have suggested that they were in no way prepared to come into the White House, but they have also continued that pattern in not filling positions, not bringing in people, not bringing in the right people. But with that said, I think that people are always willing to work in their self-interest for the right amount. And we've seen no shortage of people willing to step up and try and fill the plate. Namely, I think in what shocked everyone, but we shouldn't have been so surprised, is that Congress, Republicans within Congress, have become the first line of defense against Donald Trump, first line of defense for Donald Trump. And on his acting on his behalf, which is in part why the House race and the midterm elections are so important, because that can really change the dynamic in a number of different ways.
Yeah, interesting enough. We'll talk about that in just a moment with Robert. But John, really quickly, I know that CNBC is reporting today that Trump's lawyers actually don't want Emmett Flood to take over for Don McGahn because they like him on the Mueller probe. Are they going to need a heavy hitter as counsel, though? How are they going to reconcile these two things?
Well, you know, Comey's compared these guys to organized crime, and I think they want a wartime consigliere. And, you know, he said he's excited about who it may be, and some have mentioned Abby Lowell. I don't know if he fits that role, but I wonder if it's Rudy Giuliani or it's, you know, any number of people that you can think of that have been strong in support of the wrong-headed directions that Mr. Trump has taken. And so that makes sense to me, and I don't know that Emmett Flood would want to be in the position, because having a client who never tells you the truth makes it very difficult for you to advise him what to do. And McGahn is leaving because he told him what to do, what was right, and he didn't want to do that. And he's upset even when he followed the advice that he couldn't do what he wanted to do, which would have been a tragedy up on the Hill.
Hey, I'm Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.